listening to the soundscape of Corvo, I gave you plenty of days, so you must
Yes,
have a lot. What kind of feelings do the soundscape create to you?
To me?
Yes.
It's very cluttered with the sounds of people and buses and cars and motorbikes. Lots of motorbikes. Some of them very close. And then airplanes. So there's a lot of human traffic.
Does it make you feel stressed, having all the sounds?
I guess the way I would phrase it is, I don't necessarily feel stressed, but I don't feel relaxed. That is, for walking, when I walk out onto the street to go from one place to another, I know I have to spend, a lot of my attention has to be placed on making sure I'm safe, or I'm in the right part of the sidewalk, or where it is. So it's not the same as walking on a beach, or walking in a hillside of spring flowers. It's not that kind of relaxation.
So comparing to the place you live, it's noisier.
It's very busy.
It's busier.
Yeah. So I live in a small town in an area where there are lots of forests, and there's a stream in my backyard, and I can walk out and just listen to birds and hear the world as opposed to lots of stuff. For me, silence, of course, I would define it as the absence of sound. And of course, there is never any time where there's absolute silence. And if I'm listening to the world, great absence of sound means almost that nothing is there. So it's almost death. It's a graveyard. Because most places, even when it's extremely quiet, where quiet is different than silence, extremely quiet, such that you can hear your heartbeat, or you can hear the blood moving through your arteries and veins in your ear, there's still life. The quietest I've ever experienced has been in a cave, a very, very deep cave. And there the silence was broken by my actions. So if I moved or took a step, it would resonate. Otherwise you'd hear the dripping of things.
Did it scare you to have so much, to be in such a quiet place?
No, I don't ever remember being scared by quiet. But I grew up in places where I was constantly experiencing periods of I would call it almost deep silence, deep quiet. It's the same as going someplace where you can look up into the sky at night and you can see the Milky Way. And you can see the glitterings of densities of stars that you can't see otherwise. And it's still magnificent, and it's peaceful. And I've asked the same of some of my colleagues that I know that are deep oceanographers that go down to the bottom of the ocean, a mile or two in the ocean. And I said, well, do you listen? No. So that's one of the next initiatives is, okay, if you're going to go all the way down the bottom ocean where you think it's very, very still, maybe, well, you'd still hear sound from but far, far away. So it's almost as though you'd be in a very deep cave. And I know from recordings I've made of hydrophones that are put on cables in the deep ocean that sound still goes to places in the deep ocean. Yeah, I don't have any problem moving between those different states of mind. I think of what you're saying. So if I'm in the moment of the actuality of listening and recording and experiencing those scenes, which are in many cases incredibly novel experiences, even though I've been doing this a long time, and then returning to those scenes through the recorded media. Of course, you lose the excitement and the uniqueness of that moment of auditory discovery, but at the same time, I know what steps my mind is taking, so I can go into that space again and still enjoy it and experience it. But then there's a part of me which is very analytical, so most of the times when I'm going back in to re-listen to something, I'm actually analyzing it. As I'm trying to, for example, I'm just trying to take an inventory of what it is I hear. What is in that acoustic scene? How many of those, how many blue whales or how many wrens or whatever it is I'm listening to, how many are in that scene? And see, one of the things that's different between the way I'm thinking about sound is that although I hear song in pretty much everywhere, whether it's a little insect or a blue whale, I don't think of that as music. It's song. Whereas music is the rendering by humans into something that we call music, just like we have speech. Well, animals don't speak, but they have languages. We speak, and speech is a form of a language, but not all languages are speech. So in sort of song, I hear music by humans, but I don't, when I'm listening to a humpback singing, I don't think of that as music. It could have musical qualities. Well, since as a scientist, we use the word song to refer to ordered patterns, sequences of sounds, usually in a hierarchical kind of construction, that are produced by animals. So animals don't have words. We often refer to them as syllables, and we also talk about a syntax. We use many of the same terms, but just like I don't refer to as a communication exchange between two animals as speech. It's a communication exchange, and I wouldn't refer to it even as a language. I don't think that whales have a language, and part of that is specifically not wanting to use a word that is so loaded with a human connotation that people then project themselves and say, oh, they have a language. Well, they have a communication. They're communicating things to each other. And so when you look at it from the scientific view, it has to be very distilled, right? And you have to be as objective as possible. And yet in my lifetime, in my academic history, I went from the notion of animal communication being extremely simplistic, and to the point where it was, I would almost call it insulting, to think that, for example, primates are only able to convey really basic emotional kinds of states. And now we know that's not true. And all the barriers that were there, talking about how unique humans were in terms of their speech and their language and all these things of prescience, for example, or thinking forward or thinking backward, being devious, planning ahead. It's all over the place. Right? Animals do it all the time. There are spiders, hunting spiders. If you watch a hunting spider hunt, and it's got 8 eyes, not 2, it's got 8 eyes, it will move around and it will check out the entire situation before it jumps on its prey. And you can do all kinds of experiments to demonstrate this animal is thinking ahead about what it's going to eat in the next 15 minutes. And that's just a little spider, right? So I've seen a lot of these changes, but there's always the discussion of whether it's song or music or language or speech. I don't want to get too distracted by it, because then you end up having these discussions which are really over words that are symbols trying to represent a phenomenon or a concept. And in most cases, you and I could have a conversation and we could agree that we disagree because you use the word slightly differently than I do, because you may be a musician and you weren't trained in biological sciences of animal communication, and etc. So you see that, but you just say, okay, fine, I understand what you're saying, but let's talk about the higher concepts here.
So the problem is, basically we all agree in a way, but we're using different ways to express it, and it can create also confusion.
Oh,
even if we're trying to say the same thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Because remember in Beatles Island, I think everybody got a little bit overexcited.
Yeah.
And they were using, I think they were trying to say the same thing in the end, but they were using their own terms. So that's where we lost the communication a little bit.
Right, and then people start doing this because they become possessive of the words, or possessive of it. And that's where many times in these last few days, I've wanted to ask, and I'll ask Murray later on, so what? The so what question. All right? So imagine what if you actually had a library of all these historical records? What would you do with it? Okay, so what happens when you get to the moon? You land on the moon. So you've demonstrated that humans are clever enough to move from one planet onto its moon, and you come back with some rocks, and you want to learn about the origins of the universe or whatever. But okay, so why are we doing this? Some of it is just out of curiosity. But you heard his plea at the end. We need to make, he didn't quite say this, but a societal change. We want to make the place a healthier place, a richer place.
So it is political. In
a
way, that doesn't mean it supports
societal.
Specific. Yeah.
And this is where I see, from where I'm coming, because I come at it from, as a scientist, having worked a great deal in acoustic communication in animals. I have a specialty in whales, but pollution, acoustic pollution is all over the place, right? Land, sea, and sky. That what is the purpose of my research or my writings or my communications of these? Is it simply a passing fancy of my life? This is what I'm doing? No, I feel I have a higher responsibility, and that the richness that we've been talking about the last few days, the richness of an auditory world, which is not compressed by all the noise, which is polluting and bleaching our habitat, our soundscapes, where we only have so much headroom now to work with, because most of the time my ears are filled with junk. And do we recognize that there is I don't know quite how to think of it, is it a social value, a benefit of whether it's pleasure or health, whatever it is, to actually having quiet? And the reason I go there is because in the modern capitalistic world, you will not get a Buddhist answer to that will not be accepted as a societal solution. You're not going to get some philosophical argument convincing powers that be that everybody should stop doing what they're doing, because we live in a highly capitalistic, consumptive environment. And what I found, at least in my country, is the leverage that one can have, or if you're looking for a way to leverage what you know into a change, it has to have an economic cost. So you have to put it almost in a business plan. You have to say, this is what it's costing, this is costing us in our health. So smoking, we stop smoking because it shortens your lifespan. Come back, I've slipped back and forth, so I can write poetry and go do all those kind of things. But then in my formal training, I'm really trained as an engineer. But then biology is part of my life. And as an engineer, you're constantly asked to solve problems. So when you're asked to solve a problem, you need to have the boundary conditions. You need to have, what am I supposed to work with to solve this problem? So a discussion like that becomes totally philosophical. It's like when I took a class in James Joyce, right? I had to move from a thermodynamics class over into another building where I'm discussing James Joyce. Everything I was learning in thermodynamics, I couldn't take any of that and put it in, or if I did, it was almost like hallucinating, right? So you have to separate the two. So when you're asking me, well, is recording, if you make the recording and you put it onto whatever medium it is this year, is that sacrilegious? Is it somehow destroying the essence of the original phenomenon? Well, I know it's not the original phenomenon. Nothing is the original phenomenon except the original phenomenon, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then I ask myself, well, why am I doing this recording, right? In some cases, I'm doing it because I'm really interested in this particular population of animals and I want to see how they're communicating and the complexity. In other cases, I'm trying to describe the invasion of sound into this habitat that I was showing you,
Mm-hmm.
to quantify it in some way. And the recording becomes simply a tool along the way that I use in order to get to an objective. So I've already had a defined objective. So in many of these cases, I think that this notion of the sort of the puristic sense,
Exactly. Yeah.
you're not really trying to go anywhere, right? I mean, I don't know much about Buddhism, but I've learned enough from along the way, and my son and whatnot, and I'm going, oh, okay, so it would be, that's what it really becomes. It becomes sort of this existential, philosophical discussion. And in that case, well, yeah, I would recognize and respect someone's point of view that says you have tainted the original phenomenon by recording it, because that no longer represents that recording. That's fine, that's all right. But I'm using it for a very specific purpose. And the purpose is X, Y, and Z. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No. Now that's very
Totally.
analytical and it's very Western and all this kind of stuff, but now as I move through my life, and there are times when I was younger, I didn't have the perspective to see what I was doing and how it fit into a bigger picture. But as I experience more and I see lots of these other pieces, I start to see patterns, right? And life is sort of a series of fractals, right? So I see patterns within patterns and repeating. And that allows me as a scientist to feel comfortable jumping out, in fact, being compelled to jump out of the world that I once felt most comfortable in, because the day-to-day schedules and the kinds of research I did and the kinds of papers I wrote and all that stuff, I was comfortable in it. I was established, right? And I had my little territory and I had things that I knew. But to me, that's very boring. And then I have to ask myself, okay, so Chris, so you have a hypothesis and you write a grant and someone gives you money to pursue the hypothesis. And so what? And now before I write that proposal, I'm asking myself, and I pose this to my students. Okay, just imagine, do the thought experiment. Someone gave you the money, you spent 3 years doing this project, and you're done. You've written a paper, people are clapping, okay, so what? Why are you doing it? Right? Is there an ultimate, or is it simply a proximate exercise you're going through? Like learning how to cook a meal. Oh, well, I cook a meal because I want to eat because I'm hungry. Right? As opposed to, no, I'm cooking this meal, I need to cook it 10 times because I want to perfect it and do something else. Am I making any sense?
Yeah. So, what is your goal? What is your purpose? Have you reached that purpose? Or do you feel still that you have to do something else? Is it always, is it a non-stop?
It evolves. I would say I'm in love with the world, okay? And I've always loved life. Whether it's, as I said, people can get a little bit too much, but I love the magnificence of life and just the beauty of life and the fact that here we are having this experience. And to me, if I can help more people listen to the world and through listening understand its magnificence and the spectacular chance we have of living, that to me is what I would feel very satisfied. And I see the acoustic pollution that's happening, the acoustic bleaching, and the loss of that richness as a loss of life's richness. And just like I want my kids and your kids and his kids and, you know, the next generation, to know what it's like to sit by the side, by a seashore and hear the waves breaking and see shooting stars and that sort of sense of wonder and where one fits into this large cosmic experience. And so when I love the world and I want people to listen, it's through sound that I find some of my greatest enjoyment. And that's why wherever I go, I hear song. Not necessarily raindrops, but although there are people who are taking raindrops and turning them into music. But I know from my broad listening experience and recording throughout the world, whether it's on the bottom of the ocean or up in the highest treetops, every animal sings. And so that's when I call it the singing planet.